Stop and think of the stereotypical 3-year-old child. You see that the child in front of you has chocolate around his mouth. You ask him if he took the cookies off of the counter, noting that 2 are missing. He looks up at you, grins, and shakes his head. Did he do it? There is a good chance that he did, especially since you caught him chocolate mouth right next to the missing chocolate cookies. Noticed how he grinned up at you without any talk and ran away, cackling gleefully and thinking that he got away with it. Children start lying and experimenting with lying early on. It is not a sign that you are raising a child that will be dishonest or that your child is a bad seed. You simply have a young child that is experimenting with how best to interact with the world. Your 3-year-old now recognizes that you are not omniscient and cannot see what is in his head, so he lies. Lying can be particularly problematic in the adult world when more is at stake than a couple of cookies and a hyper 3-year-old. However, when you are interacting with the world around you and find that adults are lying to you, you can run into issues. You could potentially find yourself scammed or the victim of fraud if you cannot tell when people are honest or dishonest. Being able to identify deception and lies becomes critical in the adult world. Within this chapter, we will address lying and deception. You will be guided through several forms of deception, many of which people assume are not true lies, and how to recognize them. You will be provided with a list of criteria to double-check to determine when someone around you has been dishonest. You will also be guided through several reasons that people may choose to lie and be dishonest with others. Upon finishing reading this chapter, you should be able to recognize lies a little easier than you could before, and that skill alone can help you immensely in your interactions with the world. Deception is not just an attempt to pass a lie as the truth. In fact, there are several other aspects as well. Deception is any attempt to mislead the truth in some way, whether verbally or in action. There are several different types of deception, but ultimately, all are designed to alter the truth in some way, shape, or form, whether by legitimately changing all details or by making it a point to avoid talking about something or skirting around a question because you feel like not answering honestly by not saying anything at all is not the same as deception. Unfortunately, deception runs rampant in the world, and it can seriously damage relationships between people. Regardless of whether the relationship is romantic or entirely professional, deception can cause serious mistrust and feelings of betrayal to arise. Where there is no trust, there may as well be no relationship, something that is incredibly unfortunate. This means that lying is perhaps one of the easiest ways to entirely decimate a relationship. Deception is actually so poorly received and violates so many social rules that it can actually be deemed grounds for civil litigation. It can even be prosecuted criminally if it slips into fraud. This means that dishonesty and deception are incredibly frowned upon and should be avoided as much as possible. Deception is so much more than simply lying about what is being said. There are several other aspects to the deception that are critical to understand as well. You can deceive without ever saying a word in some instances. Understanding these different types of deception can help you acknowledge and protect yourself from them in the future, as you will know what to look out for. There are primarily 6 different types of deception that will be discussed in this chapter. Take the time to familiarize yourself with each of these in order to ensure that you do not fall into the trap of using these forms of deception yourself. Concealment. Concealing something is effectively finding a way to omit information that would be imperative to making a proper judgment. You may also behave in a way that is designed to hide the truth somehow, such as acting to avoid mentioning the truth. When you are able to identify concealment, you can tell when people are intentionally avoiding the subject at hand for some reason. And that can be enough to cue you into looking at how truthful they are being. For example, imagine that you left your child with a friend to babysit while you went out on a date with your spouse. When you get back, you'll find that your child has a big bruise on his face. You ask what the bruise is from, and your friend sort of shrugs and continues talking about something entirely unrelated, or mentions something cute that your child has done in order to distract you. This was not to genuinely share what your child has done, but rather to make you distracted so you would not pay as close of attention to the bruise. Equivocations. When you are using equivocations, you are making statements that are either indirect or ambiguous in order to skirt around the truth. You may say something that is not necessarily untrue, but you have avoided answering the true question at the heart of everything. For example, imagine that you asked your friend about the bruise on your child's face. Instead of telling you how the child was bruised, you get some spiel about how children clumsy and accidents happen. Technically true, but that completely avoided the question at hand. You still do not know how your child got the bruise in the first place. When someone uses an exaggeration, they try to make things seem worse or bigger than they currently are. It is some sort of overstatement, taking the truth and stretching it out to be bigger and worse than it otherwise would have been. This is still a form of deception, though the truth is at the heart of what is being said, simply because the truth is not being reported as the whole truth. It is being manipulated and stretched into something entirely different than it originally was. For example, after you asked your friend what happened to your child's face, you may have been told that your child had been running way too quickly without paying attention and slammed into a wall, and it was entirely accidental. Your friend says that your child should have been paying attention. You stop and consider the veracity of this and come to the conclusion that she is lying because your child is not yet running. Perhaps the child has just learned how to unsteadily toddle around. Lies are simply making up information that is entirely unrelated or inaccurate to the truth. This could be saying something that has no grounds in the truth, or saying something that is the opposite of what is actually true. When you are told a lie, there is no truth in the statement at all. It is meant to be as far away from the truth as possible, likely to disguise the real truth that could likely be construed as worse than the lie. For example, when you ask about the bruise on a child's face, your friend may respond that he already had the bruise when he was dropped off and completely refused to answer anything other than that. You are left trying to figure out whether or not that is the truth, and wondering if the child was actually bruised when dropped off. Understatements are the opposite of exaggerations. When someone makes an understatement, they are downplaying the truth to some degree. They may feel like telling the truth will be far worse than understating it, so they opt to make it seem like less of a big deal than it was initially assumed to be. This is still dangerous as it makes a potentially serious issue miss whatever attention it may have needed. For example, your friend tells you that your child simply bumped his head when he slipped while trying to walk. What she did not tell you was that he hit his head really hard, cried for 20 minutes, and vomited shortly after, and has been acting lethargic since. In that instance, your child likely needed medical treatment, and yet your friend made it sound like it was no big deal, so you would not blame her for not supervising the child closely enough. Untruth. Finally, we arise at the untruth. This is when people say things that are taking and misinterpreting the truth into something different. It is entirely meant to misinterpret things in order to distract from the actual truth, and should be treated with extreme caution. When you are dealing with someone being untruthful, you may find that the other person is likely to completely sidestep any truthfully problematic aspects and misinterpret what has happened into something else. For example, when you ask what happened to your child, your friend says that he hit his head. What she does not tell you was that she had actually dropped the child because she was not paying attention to what she was doing as she walked through her home, and she did not expect the child to flail. She sort of told the truth, but put another spin on things. Signs of deceptions. If you are not well trained, you may find that spotting deception is actually surprisingly difficult. When you know what to look for, however, it becomes infinitely simpler. Deception has a handful of signs that make it incredibly obvious, even when not paying attention to body language, such as vagueness. When someone is vague with the details and seems to resist providing any specific details, they may be trying to hide their lie altogether. Repetition. When what someone says becomes repetitive or goes in circles, they may be lying and trying to convince themselves of whatever they are saying because they are lying. Speaking in fragments. When the other person does not speak in full sentences and instead answers in short statements such as, "No, not that," or "Yes, to the store," you may be dealing with someone who is lying. Not giving specific details when asked or challenged. If, when asked directly, the other party still cannot give specific details, it is quite possible that they are actively lying to you or about something, which is incredibly problematic if you need the truth. Nervous behavior. If the other person seems uncharacteristically nervous, they may be lying, especially if the situation is not one that would usually warrant any sort of nervousness or discomfort. If the other party is quite familiar in that environment, but is repeatedly appearing to be nervous, you may want to analyze their honesty. Just knowing the signs is not always enough. Sometimes, it helps to have a sort of checklist to go through in your mind when you are trying to determine whether someone is actively lying to you or not. By understanding whether or not the other party is lying or being deceptive, you can begin to figure out how much you want to trust them. There are primarily 4 ways that you can identify whether or not you feel like someone is deceptive. Look at more than just body language. Listen to the voice for a while. Does it sound nervous or like someone who is lying? Pay attention to the words being used and whether you can identify any of the signs of deception. Focus on deceptive body language. When you do look at body language, however, look specifically for the body language that is traditionally clustered as deception. Ask for the story to be told in reverse. If someone has provided you with a long, drawn-out tale that you are doubting, one way to figure out if it is true or not is to ask them to tell you what happened, but backward this time. If they have to think too hard about it, you have a pretty good indicator that they are making things up. Trust your gut. Finally, when you are attempting to identify whether or not someone is deceptive, trust your gut instincts. Those instincts are there for a reason, and it is entirely possible that your unconscious mind has picked up on cues that you are missing as you go through the interaction. Why deception is used? When people do decide to lie or be deceptive, they usually have some sort of reason. Of course, some will do so just for fun, to see if they can do it, and others may do it in an attempt to be polite, such as saying they like something that they did not actually care for. No matter the reason, however, deception is usually recommended to be avoided. After all, even if you are actively lying to maintain a relationship, you may run into problems later on if the deception is ever discovered. Instrumentally. When used instrumentally, deception is designed to be used as a tool. It may be done as an attempt to avoid punishment, for example, such as trying to lie about doing something in order to escape blame or to establish an alibi that does not actually exist. It could be used to protect resources, such as telling someone that is asking for money that you do not have any on you and, therefore, cannot help them with whatever it was that you were asked about. These are basically wielding deception as a tool of sorts to avoid something. Relationally. When you use deception relationally, it is meant to maintain a relationship. This would be the idea of telling someone that no, that dress does not make their butt look big, while leaving out the obvious truth. Their butt is what makes their butt look big, not the dress. Relational deception is effectively to protect the feelings of other people in a way that makes sure that they are happy, even though they are still being lied to. With unimportant lies, such as how big that dress made someone's butt look, They are usually relatively harmless. However, sometimes there are larger lies as well, such as insisting that someone not related biologically at all is a child's true father, despite not sharing the genetic contribution. While that person may, for all intents and purposes, be a dad to the kid, there is still an important factor to consider that often teens, people want to know where they came from. Larger relational lies, such as telling someone their father is one person when, in fact, it is someone else, can generally be quite harmful. To preserve identity finally, people often use deception when they need to protect their self-image. They will use this form of lying to ensure that they are protected from the truth somehow, and they want to ensure that they look better than they actually are. For example, if someone has a criminal record and therefore is disqualified from a job that someone has been pushing for him to apply to, he may say that he applied and was not called back, or that he simply is not interested due to needing the background check, which the friend likely does not know about. Thank you for watching our video till end, and don't forget to subscribe our channel. Also comment your opinion about the deception.